Hi there, and welcome to a special open class. It's number 133, and it's a little different this time. Usually, as many of you know, myself or Coach Michelle will read messages that have been sent to the channel. But in today's episode, just by request, answering like going over two topics, I should say, that I promised this week that I would cover them this week, and it's Friday, so I was like, I gotta get this done. So it's a question of Neil. Neil sent me a message, I think it was via Instagram. There was an article he had read that he said he was losing sleep over. I said, let's cover this. Let's do a journal club. Let's take a look at this article right here. And then Johanna asked about paradoxical insomnia. She specifically said, Kate, talk about paradoxical insomnia. I'm looking for something that makes me hopeful. I've already seen several of your videos on this topic. So absolutely, I said, let's do this. So let's actually start with talking about paradoxical insomnia, and then we'll do a journal club, and that's it. And if you have questions live, by the way, I'll try to answer them towards the end. But yeah, let's talk about paradoxical insomnia. So what is paradoxical insomnia? Well, paradoxical insomnia is when there's a big discrepancy in how much you actually slept. Somehow in some objective fashion, when sleep has been recorded in some objective way, and how much you perceived sleeping. If you look at textbooks, it's often like, the scenario where someone slept like 7 hours, but they said they didn't sleep at all. That's kind of like classic paradoxical insomnia, if you will. There's a huge discrepancy from objective sleep and subjective sleep. And now oftentimes I think it's more like we humans typically sleep about 6 hours, so it's more like you actually slept 6 hours, but you perceived you only slept 2.5 hours. That's kind of like the more common way that it is expressed, paradoxical insomnia, if you will. But here is the thing. I made a few points here. Everyone with insomnia has paradoxical insomnia, and the reason I say that is, that everyone that has trouble sleeping to some degree has paradoxical insomnia, baked into this. In other words, when you look at studies, and this is very consistent in the literature. When you look at studies comparing people that have trouble sleeping and no trouble sleeping, and look at the objective versus subjective sleep, then the group that has trouble sleeping will estimate that it took them longer to fall asleep and than it actually did, and they will report sleeping less than they actually did. They will overestimate wakefulness, underestimate sleep. If you look at the group of people that have trouble sleeping, the opposite happens. They will underestimate how soon they fell asleep compared to objective measures, and they will overestimate how much they slept compared to objective measures. So in other words, it's very consistent. You see that everyone with trouble sleeping, with insomnia, to some degree has insomnia, paradoxical insomnia, or sleep state misperception, as it also known. So the reason I bring this up is, of course, to normalize this. It's not strange at all. It's very typical. Everyone who has had trouble sleeping has this, right? Now, what is it? Like paradoxical insomnia, the way I look at it is, it's a cover-up. It's a cover-up story. It's a cover-up story in the brain. And I just put that here as kind of a teaser. We're going to go over a few points, and then I'm going to explain this why I think of it as a cover-up. Now, another big point here is that, insomnia is basically when there is some struggle with sleep, right? I'm not sleeping, I can't get enough sleep, and things of that nature. Now, how this is experienced really depends on where the focus of the fear is, if you will. I think I wrote that down. How we experience insomnia depends on where the focus of the fear is. So I listed a couple of very common ways insomnia can be experienced. We have the trouble sleeping component, right? Plus, for example, body sensations. It can become somebody who's like the jerks. Every time I fall asleep, I jerk, and every time that just keeps going. Like 50 times a night, I just jerk awake, or twitches, palpitations, sweating, peeing all the time. That body sensations can be one way that you experience insomnia, when the fear, the focus is on these sensations, and all these sensations are normal, of course, but when we focus a lot of them, they can appear very bothersome. They can be very bothersome. Insomnia can also be experienced as primarily like a racing of the mind thing. Like I'm always obsessing. I think about it all the time. I can't control my thoughts. I have racing thoughts. I have intrusive thoughts. that aspect can be the one that really stands out as how you experience insomnia. If the focus of the fear is on kind of the inner workings of the mind, so to speak, insomnia can be experienced primarily as a form of like emotional fatigue, always drained, you're exhausted, like even the littlest thing, like you can't get done. When the focus of the fear, when the fear is really focused on the fatigue levels, etc., then you experience insomnia like this. You can experience insomnia like an energized body experience when you have this kind of nervous energy. You kind of always like, I can explain this. I'm like literally not sleeping at night, and I seem to have even more energy when I don't sleep. That hyper arousal, when it focuses on that, you experience this like an energized bunny. And another common way that insomnia is experienced is this like hyper sleep, when often there's a concern about the quality of our sleep, and time just skips ahead. I have these vivid, bizarre dreams going all night. I'm not really sure if I slept at all or what happened. I'm not really sure what happened at all. And this is when the fear, the focus is on like sort of like on sleep itself, if you will, on like monitoring sleep itself. In this like hypersleep realm, this is where I think paradoxical insomnia fits in as well. It's basically if the focus of the fear is so much onto like how much did I sleep? Did I sleep at all? Did I fall asleep? Did I wake up? Like that, then you can have this experience of not sleeping at all. And why is that? Well, here comes the guard analogy, and why I think this is a cover story. So imagine that the brain is like a sentinel. It's a survival machine. It's there to keep you safe. Its job is to keep you safe. And sometimes it can get confused, right? And with insomnia, that confusion is that being awake, this state of the brain, which is, the brain can be basically awake or asleep, right? That's the two states of the brain, essentially the two states of the brain. I say essentially because you also have like REM sleep and deep sleep and things like that. But broadly, the brain can be awake or asleep, right? And when the brain has started to think that this brain state, the state of wakefulness, is a threat, it's the dangerous, it shouldn't happen at night. When wakefulness has become identified as a threat, then the brain thinks, my job is to monitor this, make sure it doesn't happen, try to figure it out, do something about it, okay? So the brain is this kind of like sentinel that's standing guard and monitoring for wakefulness, right? And so when you're, say you go to bed, you're about to go to sleep, you're kind of hoping to sleep, you're going to bed, but the brain's kind of monitoring. It's like, let's see if what happens. Let's see if wakefulness attacks us at night, or what happens, right? Then you have this like you're in a very hyper aroused state. So of course sleep, is doesn't happen as easily, but it does happen. Eventually everyone sleeps. Every human being, animal, whatever it is, sleep will always happen. And the body can produce it by itself, and it needs sleep, so it'll always happen. But guess what? The sentinel there in the brain, it wants you to know and believe and think that it's always, always looking out for you. It's always there, standing guard. So when sleep happened, it's kind of a little bit embarrassing. It's like, oh my gosh, I fell asleep. I fell asleep on the job. And instead of kind of admitting this, if you will, instead of the brain saying, yeah, I fell asleep, I wasn't really doing my job there, I was watching, I should have been, but I really fell asleep. Instead of doing that, the brain kind of creates this cover story that no sleep happened. It's like, no. Oh yeah, it's an hour later, but no, I didn't fall asleep. That wasn't me. Something like that, right? It's this cover story, and you can have, I've personally experienced this myself. Like not necessarily the cover up part of it, but the part where the brain tries to make sense of what happens, and it's the interpretation it sends me is that I was awake all the time. It's kind of like when I'm in bed, my wife is there, and we're watching something on Netflix, something like that, and she's like turning off she's turning it off, and I'm like, why do you do that? She's like, you fell asleep, and I'm like, not at all. I have no recollection whatsoever of falling asleep. Again, my brain, because it wasn't that kind of transitional state, didn't really understand what was happening. It makes up the story that no, you didn't sleep at all. And my experience is completely that of like, no, I was awake all the time. How can you say I fall asleep? That doesn't make any sense. But the same principle of like the brain tries to present an interpretation of reality that makes sense is why we have paradoxical insomnia. But in addition to just like kind of that interpretation part, you also have the sentinel part where the brain wants to present a version of reality where it was doing its job very seriously, so it doesn't want to admit that sleep happened. So this is why I think paradoxical insomnia is a cover-up. It's a cover-up. And so now what we talked about here is basically that everyone with trouble sleeping has an element of paradoxical insomnia. Insomnia can be experienced in different ways depending on where the focus is. And so the kind of question becomes, okay, so if I've experienced this paradoxical insomnia, what should I do? I don't think it matters. It doesn't matter how you've experienced insomnia or trouble sleeping. It's always about like learning about yourself, learning about sleep. And when there's demystification, when everything is like, when you're like, I didn't sleep at all last night. Oh, wait a minute. That's just a cover story. Sleep did actually happen. I know that there's nothing mysterious or strange going on. Then, when there's this demystification, when the brain no longer is trying to problem solve, it kind of like, it understands, it kind of sees what's happening really, then things calm down because there's nothing to figure out. There's nothing to problem solve. There's nothing going on. And then that lends itself to more and more peaceful sleep and more peace of mind. So that's kind of like my thoughts there on paradoxical insomnia. Hope it made sense to Johanna and everyone else that tunes in here. And with that said, let's move over to the second part of this, which will be a journal club. We're going to look at an article. And it was a little confusing, I must say, because, okay, so Neil sent me a link to an article. And I thought, let me share my screen here. I thought the article was a published, kind of published scientific work by someone named Jordan Feigenbaum. So I was looking for that in PubMed, but that's actually not what it was. Rather, this Jordan Feigenbaum from Barbell Medicine had himself done a review of an article from 2010. So it wasn't his article, but it was rather an article from 2010 that he's reviewing, and we're going to review his review, if you will, in this journal club. So so he titled this "The Effects of Sleep Restriction on Weight Management and Body Composition," and there's kind of a little background and key points here. But then he says that I will take a look at some mechanistic evidence to explore this a bit further, looking at this study from 2010. And so this is the actual study. The title is "Insufficient Sleep Undermines Dietary Efforts to Reduce Adiposity." Okay, that's the article. And by the way, I saw this was from the University of Chicago, where I did my sleep medicine fellowship. And this type of work, I was not surprised coming from the University of Chicago because of Ev Van Cauter, who was a professor there. I believe she is maybe professor emeritus or maybe retired now. Her claim to fame is this article from 2004, where I've reviewed this many times. Brief communication, sleep curtailment in healthy young men associated with decreased leptin levels, elevated GREL levels, and increased hunger and appetite. In this article, it was like very similar to the article we'll review. It's one of these classical, like small cohort with an intervention, and they measure all kinds of things. So you take a small group of people, say, okay, this group can only sleep 4 hours, this group can sleep how much, however they sleep. And then we check like their hormone levels in these different groups. And in this study from 2004, what she showed was that so their ghrelin levels when they were sleep deprived increased, and leptin levels were decreased, which supposedly can make you like more hungry. And I think there was at this time there was a lot of talk about how like if you're sleep deprived, not only will you be more hungry, you will also crave more unhealthy food. And this also led to the whole idea of how like sleep deprivation could potentially lead to like type 2 diabetes scenarios, so things like that. And the short of this one is that none of this really panned out. There was a lot of articles did not show the same results, and there was no real intervention anyway. Like, what can you really do? You can't control sleep. I think Ev Van Cauter, she tried to she tried to study if like CPAP for sleep apnea could kind of lead to better outcomes in terms of like glucose metabolism. But again, none of that really panned out. But that's just to give you a little backstory. I met her. She seems super nice. I was there. Actually, I was there when Van Cauter, when she became a professor at the University of Chicago. But anyway, So back to the study of the study here. Let's look at what's going on here. So uh, the idea here was to study participants like uh, diet, activity, and sleep. And I think this is the context of like, kind of optimizing your health and losing weight and those type of things. So what did they do? Well, they took 12 subjects, 5 women, 7 men, aged 35 to 49, and they were recruited through a local newspaper advertisement. All of them were non-smokers. BMI was kind of overweight to obese, 25 to 32. And they said all participants self-reported sleeping 6.5 to 8.5 hours, average 7.7 hours per sleep. So already we can see that there's some, like, you can't make that much, you can't say that much probably from the results of the study. It's very small. The the baseline measure of sleep was like very it was not objective at all, and we know this so many. We just talked about paradoxical insomnia. People are not very good at estimating how much they sleep, and in this they seem to overestimate. They seem to estimate quite a lot of sleep, so they're a little bit of an outlier type group of participants, I would say. So that's kind of number one observation there. Let's go back. All participants reported to be sedentary. Unfortunately, the authors did not define what was meant by sedentary. So again, I don't know what you can make of that. Now, so this is what I think was important for our purposes, which was the exclusion criteria were self-reported sleep problems. So this group had like a sleep problem score in the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index of 3, where having sleep problems was defined at a score of more than 10. So they had absolutely no problem sleeping in this cohort, right? They were sleeping really well, and they estimated sleeping in 7 hours. There was no depression, and they looked at some other things. But the reason I brought this up was to highlight that there's so much confusion out there when it comes to like sleep deprivation and insomnia. So on this channel, in this community, what this channel is all about insomnia. When you have trouble sleeping, you're like, what's going on? Why can't I sleep? Why I'm not sleeping, etc. Right? That's insomnia, right? The fear of not sleeping is driving you to have choppy sleep, versus sleep deprivation, which is just like you have absolutely no problem sleeping. It's just that you don't have time to sleep. Like you're sleeping less than you would like to sleep because either of obligations or preferences, that's sleep deprivation. So we can see that this group that's studied here had absolutely no insomnia whatsoever, right? So you can't make any type of extrapolations, or like you can't say anything about someone who has insomnia based on this study, which I think for someone like Neil is very important. And then you can make the case that, well, isn't someone with insomnia also sleep deprived because you sleep less? I don't think that's the same thing at all. Like when the reason you sleep less is fear, or the reason you sleep less is like just because you don't have enough time and there's no fear at all involved. I think those are very, very different things. So I don't think you can say anything about insomnia when it comes to this study. But for the sake of looking at it, we'll still, we'll take a look at what they saw and what they found. Okay, so it's a randomized randomized crossover study. So the subjects are they're in kind of two different conditions. Either they have like 8.5 hours in bed or 5.5 hours in bed, and then and they do this for like 14 days, and then I believe they switch around. So the first group who were in the 8.5 hour, they then also do the 5.5 hour condition, and vice versa. All right. After completing one of the conditions, participants crossed over to the other condition after 3 months outside the lab, kind of a washout period. And then they checked, and during, part of the study, they checked like fat using like DEXA scans. They checked body weights, measuring and using electronic scale, et cetera, et cetera. They also talked to a registered dietitian. What did they do? They had like resting energy expenditure assessed using indirect calorimetry. They checked diets. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Hunger was assessed. Okay. So they did this testing, and they used sleep was monitored using a sleep machine that measured brain activity. She's an EEG. They spent the waking hours engaged in home office type work or leisure activities. No exercise. I didn't think they actually did not check uh, activity very much. They did check leptin levels. I don't know exactly when. Ghrelin levels, other hormones, reverse T3. Okay, let's look at the weight. Both groups had lost approximately the same amount of weight. Okay, that's like the first thing they mention in the results section. So didn't matter which condition you were in the kind of like the group that were could sleep up to 8.5 hours, or the group that were curtailed to 5.5 hours. Didn't matter. You slept the same amount. And so how do you report that? Like if you do the study and you're looking to see like, okay, does sleep restriction lead to like you gaining weight or losing weight? That's kind of what you're really interested in. And it's like, whoa, no difference. It was the same. And, how are you going to publish that? How can you publish a study that says like sleep restriction has no impact on weight? Nobody's going to publish that. You're not going to get that into any type of journal. It's not going to lead to you to getting any funding or any interest or anything like that. So that has absolutely no interest, right? And this is where things get tricky, because I think a very nice headline would be sleep restriction has no impact on weight. Oh my gosh, like imagine that. That would be such a relief for so many people who thought that it was important that I have to get enough sleep so I can lose weight or I can build up muscle or something like that. That's the headline we want. But of course, that doesn't work. That's not a headline that gets attention or gets people scared or excited. So you have to dig. You have to dig into the data and see. However, there was a substantial difference in the type of weight loss. For example, the 8.5 hour time in bed group lost 1.5 kilo fat-free mass and 1.4 kilo fat mass, about 50-50 split. Conversely, the 5.5 hour time in bed group lost 2.5 kilos of fat-free mass and only 0.6 kilos of fat mass. These differences were found to be statistically significant. Okay, so the authors here, where they're taking this is saying that, all right, the amount of fat was the amount of weight loss was the same. However, in the sleep restricted group, they lost the type of weight that you don't want to lose. They didn't lose fat. They lost other, weight from other parts of your body, like maybe protein, maybe they lost muscle. That's the idea here. I'm very, very skeptical of this. Again, it's a small study. How do you measure that exactly? Like these DEXA scans, like how accurate are they to tell like exactly where, like, did you lose, weight from fat in your tongue or your ear, or was it muscle from your kind of like fingers, or like how do you really know that? I know the one objective measure that I think is unquestionable is absolute weight, which was unchanged. And then you have the extrapolation from this, like okay, so you put someone in a short sleep group for like a couple of weeks and you say that they lose more non-fat body weight. What can we deduce from that in terms of like what happens a month later, 3 months later, 6 months, a year later, in terms of that person's body weight or ability to exercise or build weight or something like that? I don't think you can make any type of conclusions whatsoever from that. So that was the one thing. Diet. The average resting metabolic rate for participants was 1624 calories per day. The average total daily energy expenditure for those in the 8.5 and 5 hour group scheduled time in bed groups were about the same: 2136 versus 2139 calories. 2136 versus 2139 calories. It was like the same. It was exactly the same. And it's the same thing there. Like if you run the study and you put, the headline as like short sleep versus long sleep does not affect your calorie expenditure. I can't even say the word expenditure. Then who's going to be interested in that? But that's the actual finding of the study. There was no difference. There was no difference. That is the actual finding here. There was also no difference in the thermic effect of food groups. Okay, so hormone levels were somewhat different. which we've seen many other times in the past. Nothing new there. So what is the take-home message? For me, the take-home message is that sleep, whether you have like longer, shorter sleep, opportunity, it was not actually shown to have any impact on caloric expenditure and weight. That's kind of my take home. And I don't know what to say except that again, that type of headline that I would like to see, that it doesn't matter, it doesn't get any type of attention. So unfortunately, I think if you're in academia, you're pretty much forced to find something that seems a little scary, a little attention grabbing to get published, to get to get funding, et cetera. Which, if anybody's interested in this topic, this is basically what I write about so much in Why We Don't Sleep. All right, so Neil and Johanna, hope this was helpful. Thanks everyone for being live with me, and that's it. Hope you have a nice weekend. See you next week. Bye now.